They said one person couldn't change the rules of the HOA, that one stubborn, solar-loving homeowner couldn't take on the mighty Karen and her clipboard army, but they clearly underestimated my ability to turn a petty grudge into a full-blown neighborhood revolution. The day I installed my solar panels, I didn't realize I was signing up for a full-blown neighborhood drama, but, oh, did the sparks fly. Figuratively at first, then literally in Karen's boiling rage. You see, in the calm suburban utopia of HOA regulations and manicured lawns, one shiny rooftop addition can turn into an all-out war zone, especially when your next-door neighbor is Karen, the self-appointed sheriff of the Look and Act Right Brigade. From the moment those sleek panels caught the morning sun and glistened like a futuristic crown atop my roof, Karen's eyes narrowed with the kind of disdain usually reserved for political debates or reality TV show finales. She practically stormed over with a clipboard, her steps heavy with the confidence of someone who believes they're about to save the neighborhood from a catastrophe they themselves imagined. "This violates our community guidelines," she said with the smug tone of a teacher catching a kid chewing gum in class, waving around a note thicker than the Bible of HOA rules. The violation. My solar panels supposedly detracted from the aesthetic harmony of the street. Now, if that sentence doesn't sound like pure HOA speak, I don't know what does. Because what it really meant was, your roof looks different than mine, and that's unacceptable. Karen didn't care about the benefits of clean energy or the potential savings on my electricity bill. No, her world revolved around keeping every picket fence perfectly white and every mailbox meticulously uniform, even if that uniformity was the very thing choking the spirit of progress in our little slice of suburbia. But here's the kicker. While Karen was busy waving her no solar flag, the rest of the world was charging full steam ahead into renewable energy, slapping solar panels on rooftops from California to Cornwall, turning neighborhoods into buzzing little hubs of sustainability. Yet Karen's mind was a fortress, impervious to facts and figures, convinced that my solar panels would somehow turn the neighborhood into a dystopian solar farm, ruining property values and scaring off the mailman. I tried reasoning with her, thinking maybe if I showed her the numbers, the energy savings, the environmental benefits, the cool fact that my panels even came with a lifetime warranty, she might soften. Nope. Her reply was a cold, corporate-style email full of legal jargon and veiled threats of fines. I mean, who knew that solar panels could spark more heat than the actual sun? It wasn't just a personal battle. It was a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. And honestly, it felt like one of those classic stories where the old guard tries to fight the new wave, except this wave had a lot more juice and a lot less tolerance for HOA tyranny. What made it worse was the underlying hypocrisy of it all. Karen drove a gas-guzzling SUV, blasting her air conditioner like it was an Olympic sport, yet here she was, squawking about how my silent, clean energy solution was the real problem. It was the kind of irony that made you want to laugh or cry, or both at the same time. But instead of just sitting back and letting Karen's letters pile up like junk mail, I decided to turn the tables. I reached out to neighbors quietly interested in solar, sharing what I knew, helping them research installers, even organizing a few informal chats on our front lawns where we swapped stories and tips on how to reduce energy bills and shrink carbon footprints. Slowly but surely I could see a change, a subtle shift in attitude that went from skepticism to curiosity and then to outright excitement. Suddenly, solar wasn't just that weird thing my neighbor did. It became a community movement. The best part? Karen's attempts to intimidate me and others only fueled the fire. The more she threatened fines, the more folks pushed back, often in clever and quiet ways, installing panels where they could hide them, planting vines for camouflage, or even simply ignoring her letters. The neighborhood chat groups became a hotbed of solar talk, sharing photos of newly installed panels, discussing tax credits, and swapping anecdotes about HOA run-ins. It was like watching a grassroots revolution bloom right under Karen's nose, and that was deliciously satisfying. Over time, the street started to transform. One house at a time, the rooftops began to gleam with solar arrays, making the entire block look less like a cookie-cutter subdivision and more like a beacon of modern living. People started noticing the benefits: lower bills, more reliable power during outages, and a collective pride in doing something good for the planet. It was the kind of progress that's both quiet and profound, a testament to what happens when people dare to challenge outdated rules and stubborn minds. Karen, on the other hand, became more isolated. Her once commanding presence faded into the background as neighbors started to bypass her meetings and ignore her emails. It was clear her reign as the neighborhood watchdog was crumbling. And, honestly, it couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. In the end, my solar panels were more than just an energy solution. They were a symbol of resistance, community, and change. They taught us that sometimes standing up for what's right means putting a few shiny panels on your roof and saying, "No thanks, Karen, we're going solar." And as the sun set each evening over our little street, reflecting off those panels, it felt like watching a neighborhood literally powered by hope, defiance, and a whole lot of sunshine. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's crusade against my solar panels morphed from subtle digs to full-on neighborhood warfare. And let me tell you, it was as entertaining as it was infuriating. It started innocently enough, a passive-aggressive note tucked into my mailbox one morning, the kind that tries to sound friendly but screams, "I'm watching you." The note was dripping with HOA jargon, citing some obscure clause about maintaining uniformity in rooftop aesthetics, which, translated from HOA speak, basically meant, "Your shiny new panels ruin the pristine, boring monotony I expect around here." That note was just the opening volley, a warm-up for what was to come. Karen quickly escalated her efforts, turning her passive aggressiveness into full-blown action, like a neighborhood vigilante on a mission. She started sending formal letters marked with big red urgent stamps that looked like they'd been printed at the Pentagon and hand-delivered by secret agents. The letters threatened fines, legal action, and possible community disapproval, as if I was about to bring down the entire HOA regime with my rooftop rebellion. She even went as far as holding surprise HOA meetings right on her immaculate front lawn, probably hoping to shame me in front of the neighbors, her perfectly manicured azaleas nodding in agreement behind her. But instead of cowering under her glares and lip curls of disapproval, I decided to flip the script. If she wanted a war of aesthetics, I'd give her one. I spent a weekend turning my yard into a visual statement of eco-friendly defiance. First, I painted my fence the same glossy black as my solar panels to tie everything together and make the whole setup look sleek and intentional, not just some eyesore, as Karen claimed. I hung wind chimes made from recycled metal scraps, their tinkling a gentle reminder that sustainability could sound as good as it looked. Next, I installed a bird bath that doubled as a rainwater collector. A subtle yet cheeky nod to the environment conscious among us, but just ambiguous enough to keep the HOA at bay since it wasn't explicitly banned. My yard quickly transformed into a tiny off-grid paradise, a little rebellion wrapped in neatly trimmed hedges and clever landscaping. And here's the kicker. Instead of sparking more outrage, it made the neighbors curious. I began noticing people walking by with slow, appreciative nods. Some even stopped to ask about the cost savings, the installation process, and the environmental impact. The tide was turning quietly, but unmistakably. My solar panels, once the object of Karen's scorn, became a conversation starter, a symbol of progress rather than a nuisance. Meanwhile, Karen's iron grip on the community began to show cracks. Some neighbors who had once sided with her started whispering about the absurdity of policing rooftops in 2025. A few even quietly installed panels themselves, hiding them just enough to avoid the wrath but making their stance clear. The community, Chat groups, which had been silent on the solar front, suddenly buzzed with photos, advice, and success stories about going green. Karen tried to fight back, sending more letters, threatening fines, and organizing another meeting. But this time, attendance was low, and the mood was less supportive. Many showed up armed with facts about renewable energy, legal advice, and a refusal to be bullied by a single disgruntled neighbor. Her attempts to vilify my solar setup backfired spectacularly, galvanizing a grassroots movement that spread like wildfire through our little suburb. What started as a personal fight became a communal cause, fueled by the idea that clean energy was not just good for the environment, but good for the wallet and community pride. I even set up a small info booth during neighborhood events, sharing brochures about solar incentives, tax credits, and energy efficiency. Folks who were skeptical before began to see the tangible benefits, and the fear-mongering lost its teeth. There was a strange kind of magic in watching a neighborhood, so long defined by rules and regulations, embrace change together. It reminded me that even in places dominated by red tape and nitpicking, people yearn for something better, something brighter and cleaner. And yes, it also reminded me that one determined homeowner with solar panels and a little sass can shake up the status quo more than a dozen HOA rulebooks ever could. All this while Karen retreated further into her fortress of community standards, increasingly isolated, clinging to outdated rules as if they were a lifeline. Her emails grew more frantic and less coherent, a mix of legal threats and personal attacks that read like a bad soap opera script. Meanwhile, my street was transforming. One by one, homes began sporting panels, little squares of hope glinting in the sunlight, turning the neighborhood into a mini solar farm. The energy independence wasn't just a dream, it was becoming a reality. And ironically, Karen's stubborn. Resistance only made the movement stronger. It was the classic story of the old guard versus the new wave, but this wave was powered by sunshine, community spirit, and a heck of a lot of patience. It taught me that sometimes the best way to win a battle isn't to fight fire with fire, but to let the sun do the work, and believe me, it shines pretty bright. So while Karen's HOA handbook sits on a dusty shelf gathering more cobwebs than respect, the roofs on our street tell a different story. One of resilience, progress, and a shared vision for a cleaner, brighter future. And I'm proud to say, my solar panels weren't just a victory for me. They sparked a neighborhood revolution, one sunny panel at a time. The tipping point didn't just sneak up on us. It crashed like a solar flare, blasting through Karen's carefully curated world of HOA supremacy. After her escalating threats, including that infamous final notice letter that practically steamed with the kind of rage reserved for people who find a single leaf out of place in their immaculate gardens, the neighborhood had already decided where it stood. What she thought would cow me into submission only lit a fire under the entire street. And suddenly, Karen was the lone holdout on a block undergoing a full-blown green renaissance. It started with hushed conversations over backyard fences. Whispered alliances formed between neighbors who, before this, barely exchanged more than a nod and a curt, "Good morning." People who once worried more about lawn height than the planet's health now swapped stories about wattage, inverter brands, and government rebates with the fervor of stockbrokers during a bull market. I watched as the first hesitant solar panels went up, a cautious, almost stealthy installation hidden behind bushes or angled away from the street just enough to avoid Karen's watchful eyes. But that didn't last long. Each installation became a beacon, a middle finger to the status quo that galvanized the rest of us. Soon, solar batteries appeared like magic boxes, humming quietly in garages and sheds, allowing us to store and use energy even when the sun took a break. The neighborhood was no longer just surviving under the grid's mercy. We were thriving, rewriting the rules on our own terms. People swapped their noisy, gas-guzzling lawnmowers for sleek electric models that didn't wake the neighborhood at dawn or spew clouds of fumes into the pristine air. Kids learned about renewable energy not from textbooks, but from the real-life example outside their windows, the collective power of a community refusing to be held back by petty HOA rules. And the wind turbines? Oh, those tiny little whirring beauties popping up in backyards like wildflowers were the icing on the cake. Subtle, elegant reminders that energy independence wasn't a dream, but a vibrant reality taking root. Meanwhile, poor Karen, bless her outdated HOA soul, was stuck in the past, a relic clutching her rulebook as if it were a shield against the inevitable tide of change. She was the only house still tethered to the grid, the last gasp of fossil fuel dependence amid a blossoming, solar-powered utopia. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who demanded conformity and punished progress became the outlier, the very example of what happens when you resist the future. Her complaints, once the loudest on the block, dwindled into frustrated grumbles, barely audible over the quiet hum of solar success stories flourishing all around. Her attempts to rally support fell flat as neighbors shrugged and rolled their eyes, tired of her battles that seemed less about community and more about control. What was meant to be a simple issue about solar panels had exploded into a full-scale cultural shift, a microcosm of a world learning to let go of the old and embrace the new. The sense of camaraderie among neighbors blossomed too. Solar installation parties turned into block barbecues celebrating milestones like First Grid Independence Day and Zero Carbon July, complete with homemade banners and laughs louder than Karen's usual scolding. In meetings where Karen once commanded the room with her HOA edicts, residents now spoke with confident voices about sustainability, energy freedom, and the joy of self-reliance. It was a beautiful irony that Karen's own stubbornness had inadvertently united the neighborhood in a cause bigger than any rule book, creating a community that cared more about planet Earth than perfectly trimmed hedges. The transformation extended beyond energy, too. People started talking about water conservation, shared garden projects, and even community composting. All things that made Karen squirm but made sense to everyone else. My solar panels weren't just a personal victory anymore. They were the catalyst for a whole street to rethink what living in harmony with nature could look like, even in a place bound by HOA rules. As for Karen, her frustrations became almost comical. Her once powerful HOA meetings shrank in attendance, with many neighbors skipping out, not out of disrespect, but because they had better things to do than listen to the same tired complaints. Her social media rants, meant to rally the community, instead became a source of entertainment, screenshots shared privately with chuckles and eye-roll emojis. When she tried to organize a petition to ban solar panels outright, it was met with overwhelming rejection. The HOA board quietly distanced themselves, recognizing that the tide had turned and that fighting the solar revolution was as futile as trying to stop the sunrise. The final blow came during a summer street party, one of those spontaneous celebrations of energy independence. With the neighborhood lit up by LED lights powered entirely by solar batteries, electric cars quietly humming along the curbs, and laughter echoing through the warm night air, Karen stood out like a statue, still hooked up to the grid, her house the last fossil fuel stronghold in a sea of progress. Someone even cheekily hung a sign on her fence reading, "Last fossil fuel on the block." Karen's glare was sharp, but the mood was too joyous to be dampened. It was the moment when the community embraced its future, leaving behind fear, resistance, and outdated rules. And through it all, I realized that the real power wasn't just in the solar panels, it was in the people willing to stand up for change, to challenge tradition, and to let the sun light the way forward. Karen's fight was never really about solar panels. It was about control, fear of change, and clinging to a status quo that no longer made sense. But when faced with a community united by progress, even the fiercest opposition melts away, replaced by hope, innovation, and the quiet hum of a neighborhood powering its own destiny. By the time Karen realized her grip on the neighborhood was Slipping faster than the ice cream in a summer heat wave, it was already too late to stop what had become a full-blown solar takeover. What started as my modest attempt to push back against her ridiculous HOA demands quickly snowballed into a grassroots revolution powered by clean energy and a whole lot of stubbornness. Karen's complaints became background noise, like a mosquito, buzzing in the ear, annoying but easily ignored when the hum of solar panels and electric cars filled the air. As word spread about the benefits of solar energy, neighbors who once scoffed at the idea joined the movement, turning our little block into a shining beacon of sustainable living that caught the attention of local officials and even media outlets, hungry for a good feel-good story in these otherwise chaotic times. The utility company's response was priceless. Instead of sending bills, they started mailing checks to residents, paying for the surplus electricity fed back into the grid, which only fueled our enthusiasm and irked Karen further. We weren't just fighting an HOA rule anymore. We were rewriting the rules of neighborhood living, showing what's possible when a community unites behind a cause bigger than petty restrictions. Local news crews arrived, cameras in tow, eager to capture the transformation. The neighborhood. That went off-grid became our unofficial slogan, plastered on social media and local headlines, much to Karen's chagrin. Her last-ditch effort to rally support for an outright ban on solar panels at the city council meeting was met with laughter and outright rejection. The tide had turned, and even city officials recognized the value of energy independence and environmental responsibility. Karen, once the formidable HOA enforcer, was now the lone holdout, her protests drowned out by the collective voice of a community embracing progress. Eventually, she had to face facts. The no solar sign that once defiantly decorated her front lawn disappeared one afternoon, replaced by a set of sleek solar panels quietly installed on her roof, a reluctant admission that the future was here, and there was no stopping it. Seeing her begrudgingly adapt was almost poetic justice, a quiet victory for those of us who believed in sustainable change and refused to be bullied by outdated rules. The neighborhood continued to thrive, with solar-powered streetlights illuminating evening walks, electric vehicles replacing gas guzzlers, and neighbors sharing tips on energy efficiency and environmental stewardship. What began as a battle against one woman's unreasonable demands evolved into a story about community resilience, innovation, and the power of collective action. Through it all, I never lost sight of the lesson beneath the layers of solar panels and legal battles. That change, even when resisted, finds a way, and sometimes all it takes is a little sun and a lot of determination to light the way. Karen's saga became a cautionary tale, a reminder that clinging to the past only delays the inevitable, and that progress waits for no one. And as I watch my street bask in the glow of our own making, I can't help but smile, knowing that the power of the sun and the power of a community united has finally won. If you love stories of sweet revenge and neighborhood drama, hit that subscribe button for more HOA Karen stories. Don't miss the next tale where the underdog always wins. Subscribe now.